Looking for places to explore in Germany? The fairy tale route gives you beautiful scenery and will challenge everything you thought you knew about the Brothers Grimm. In this episode, we're headed off on the Deutsche Marchen Strasse, or fairy tale route. I'm super excited to follow in the track of the Grimm Brothers. Their stories are world-renowned. Cinderella, Rapunzel, Sleeping Beauty. I'm really excited to see the places they grew up and gathered their stories. I got a few unexpected surprises along the way.
I don't have a great deal of interest in fairy tales. I didn't know what to expect. That said, I enjoy architecture, and it still had that to offer. So we got everyone together and we packed our cars and we drove first destination to Hameln.
We start off following the trail of rats in the town of Hameln, home of the Pied Piper.
The first thing you noticed was that everything was pedestrianised, cobbled streets. You actually had to park outside and all the traffic went around the town. So you could enjoy the different types of architecture, lots of intricate detail, typical of the German way. See, one of my favourites, very colourful. It must have taken ages. And each one of these tells a story with some form of history away about the place. And you weren't short of finding something of interest, a statue, a monument, a piece of art. This one was particularly outstanding and one of my favourites. About the opening of the Iron Curtain. The artist gives you so much to look at and digest. Really worth the look.
But it's the rats and the Pied Piper that feature everywhere in Hameln. So I was really surprised to learn that it's based on a true story, except for one major difference. There were never any rats. Hameln has records going back centuries, recording the actual event where hundreds of their children went missing. There are theories of a dance mania, where people actually danced in the streets until they dropped from exhaustion and died. There's theories of a paedophile coming in and taking away all of their children. There's theories of recruiters who were coming around dressed in bright clothing and playing instruments and then recruiting people to migrate to Eastern Europe. It seems the Grimm brother picked up on this rather macabre story and then added in the rats so that they can make the moral of keep your promises, where actually it was just a huge tragedy. So it's kind of weird that the modern town of Hameln would capitalise this, but it works. It brings in the tourists. And the town is really fun. The sound of the chimes of the glockenspiel keeps you dancing.
Having enjoyed ourselves in Hameln, we moved on to Hämelschenburg.
As Darryl's driving, I'm imagining the Grimm brothers on a horse and cart, stopping at the local inns, gathering their stories from all the wee villages that they passed through. It's pretty cool to think the scenery that I'm seeing now is scenery that inspired the settings for their stories. Or so I thought.
On arrival in Hämelschenburg, we were greeted with this large yet quaint castle. Sadly, we could only see from the outside. I think to get the full taste of it, we would have had to go inside. The grandeur of it was phenomenal, and we were very blessed with a beautiful day. Although we did feel a little bit uneasy about going through that gate, not knowing whether we should be or not, although our curiosity got the best of us.
I was curious because the castle's website said that this is where Frau Holle lived. I'd never heard of that Grimm fairy tale before, so I did a bit of research. It's got all your typical stuff: evil stepmother, ugly stepsister, industrious and beautiful girl who's poorly treated and in need of rescue. Strangely, it doesn't actually have a castle in it. When you do more research, it turns out Mother Hulda was a pagan goddess, so popular with women that the Catholic Church actually declared her a demon. But her legend survived. And it's still common to say in Hesse, Hulda is making her bed. That is, she shakes her bed and out falls the snow from heaven. So maybe the castle's advertising took a few liberties. But the lake is beautiful. We weren't allowed to go inside. Everything was under construction, but you could try your luck between April through to October.
So we decided to go off of the motorways, and it was just refreshing to go onto the B roads, and you got to see a lot more. But then it brought us to Lowenburg Castle.
As you walk up to Lowenburg, you're stunned by this amazing fairy tale castle. You can just imagine Rapunzel's hair coming all the way down to the ground. You can see Sleeping Beauty up into the tower. Yeah, no, wrong. Actually, it wasn't built until after the stories were written.
Landgrave Wilhelm IX had Lowenburg built based on a model of a dilapidated knight's castle. It's supposed to show that his principality has ruled the country since 1567. So basically, he built this to show off. Love the fact that the drawbridge almost looks like it's workable. You'll notice that it has everything from the Middle Ages: castle tower, tournament area, and armoury. In fact, it has many towers. Most definitely lots of towers.
That's actually one thing the Grimm brothers got right. People were locked away in towers all the time. Could be for debt or taken as a political prisoner and held for ransom. Women were locked up just for loving the wrong person, which is kind of interesting when you think about it, because the Grimm brothers reversed that and their princesses were set free by love.
While it might just be a replica, it is 200 years old. It is an amazing place to walk around. The interior is designed to look like a princely pleasure palace, although Wilhelm never actually lived there. I particularly wouldn't want to live in a place like this. It's just not for me. There's certainly a lot of maintenance, especially the surrounding park. Just looking at that, there's a view. Wow.
Lowenburg truly is a beautiful place. So even though it's not an authentic fairy tale castle, we still highly recommend it. But do make sure you check out the tour times. And the day we were there, we couldn't find an English version. So you might want to check that on the website.
So, small journey down the hill into Kassel. The first thing that struck me about Kassel is the way that it's mapped out. It's so modern, mid-central. It was really surprising. And then it had this amazing parkways. And first stop was Merhard Park.
There's a fabulous museum there, Grimveld, which is dedicated entirely to the Grimm brothers. It's really interactive, very modern setup for a museum. Unfortunately, we weren't allowed to film inside, but we totally recommend you go up the top and have a look at the view of the city.
You must visit the beautiful state park. This was particularly manufactured. If you took a drone, you'd see that it was sectioned. And there's the Frühstück Pavilion. It was first created over 300 years ago. There has been some modern artwork created since those times. It is a place now of expression, as with the new gallery we have here. Something interesting about that is that it was actually a victim of World War II. It was damaged and burnt out in 1943 in a British air raid. It's been rebuilt, and that was a weird building. Just didn't look like it was being used. This was fascinating, the orangery. It was a Baroque castle built in 1703. The orangery is now the planetarium. Don't think that we brought the sheep along with us. These sheep were not from New Zealand, even though the New Zealander is showing a lot of interest in that.
Then we headed off to a place I was really looking forward to, the Fairy Tale Quarters. This is where I made my greatest surprising discovery.
It's just like a little corner, unsuspecting, that is like lived in on a daily basis. You can almost imagine your neighbours chatting with each other, gossip and gossip and gossip. But it was a beautiful little corner. The buildings are all typically half timbered. I just loved the way that it seemed to be restored to its old original. I remember seeing a very important building, how it's still standing, still operating, and yet it was somebody of history living there.
The community really celebrates the Grimm's fairy tales. There are information signs everywhere, but they're not about the brothers. They're about the women. I'm sure I'm not the only one who always thought that the Grimm brothers had travelled through the German countryside gathering their stories from village peasants. Wrong. Actually, they just wrote down the stories of a small group of middle-class women who happened to live in their neighbourhood. One woman, Dorothea Veeman, contributed 21 of their fairy tales. In the first English translation of their stories, she's called a peasant, but in reality, she's the French wife of a middle-class tailor. They got a whole bunch of their stories from women who used to meet in a local storytelling circle. The Grimm brothers Germanized them until they became so popular that even the Nazi Party used them to promote nationalism. There are a few Grimm fairy tales that are actually banned after the war. So by now I'm feeling a little bit confused about how I'm feeling about the whole Grimm brothers thing. But I'm looking forward to our last stop, which is where they spent most of their childhood.
So our next stop was Steinau and der Strasse. Again, we found very characterful buildings. From what I understand, the oldest half-timbered house in the city was built around 1520. And as you walk down the street, which seems quite newly restored, there were some pretty amazing little motifs. Okay, so perhaps some of them were going through renovation. This would have been a very bustling town, because this is on an old Frankfurt-Leipzig trade route. Traders and travellers passed through the town, harnessing their wagons to relax in the numerous inns. In fact, I don't think we're showing any of the inns. This is a very quiet day, and that's because we came in on a Sunday. And we stopped and had a coffee, a rather fabulous coffee too. I can't quite remember what this house was about.
But this house is where the brothers actually lived with their family. The brothers were 5 and 6 years old when they first moved to Steinau, and they got to live in this big house with servants quite happily for 5 years, until sadly their father passed away, and then they had to move on into less luxurious circumstances. Their mother became dependent on help from extended family, and the two brothers had to very quickly learn how to take on some adult responsibilities. They took on the advice of their grandfather, became very hard workers, and headed off to the big cities to improve their education and career prospects.
If you're stuck for what the Grimm brothers are about and which stories they're used to telling, there's a few there listed. I didn't know them all, I have to admit, but I love the way this house has decided to show us. So in the middle of Steinau, there's a castle. As visiting from Lowenburg to seeing this one, very different castles. From what I understand, it's the best preserved early Renaissance castle complex in Hesse. But it incorporates parts of the original medieval castle. And inside the castle, there's a really interesting museum, which begins with the history of the castle, showing some original castle walls. What was great about this is the explanations were given in English, so that was very, very helpful.
A large part of the museum is dedicated to the whole Grimm family, as the brothers weren't the only ones who had successful careers. And a big portion of the museum is dedicated to the brothers' greater passion. It wasn't their fairy tales. Their biggest ambition was to write a German dictionary. They started their work in 1838, but they were pretty detailed and pedantic, and they took their time about it. It was 20 years before the first volume was published. Wilhelm was still working on the letter D when he died in 1859. Jacob managed to complete the letter E and was up to fruit when he died in 1863. 178 years after they started it, the book was finally finished. But they are still most well known for their fairy tales, and the first ever edition is a registered World Documentary Heritage item. So even though I got some surprises along this fairy tale route, can't deny the Grimm brothers are among the most important intellectual personalities in German and European cultural history, and I really enjoyed learning about their lives.
I'm Darryl.
And I'm Justine.
And we are the Breakaway Bravehearts.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and share with your friends.